friend of mine related to me a story that happened to him a few years ago. It was a Monday night. He was staying in Midtown, and it just so happens that in the same hotel where he was staying, the San Antonio Spurs, who had just beaten the New York Knicks, were staying in that hotel. And Tuesday morning in the hotel, he bumps into the great coach of the San Antonio Spurs, Greg Popovich. And he walks over to Popovich and he says, "Coach, I want you to know that the lessons that you espouse to your teams about leadership and growth not only impact them, but beyond basketball, guys like me in the business world, we learn from people like you." With Popovich now flattered, he said, "Do you have a minute?" And Popovich said to him, "I want to tell you something." He said, "Have you ever heard of Jacob Riis?" The guy responded, "No, not really." Popovich said, "Back home in San Antonio, I have a quote from him in the locker room listed in several languages. It speaks about the importance of repetition. And the quote goes, 'When nothing seems to help, I go look at a stone cutter hammering away at his rock, perhaps 100 times without as much as a crack showing in it. Yet at the 101st blow, it will split in two. And I know that it was not that blow that did it, but all that had gone into it before.'" And my friend responded, "Coach, do you have a minute?" He said, "Sure." "Have you ever heard of the Talmud?" I said, "Yes." So the Talmud tells a story of Rabbi Akiva, who knew nothing. And one day he saw there was water dripping on a rock. And he saw that a hole had been created, not from one drip, but from the drops that were coming one after another, from the repetition. And it inspired him to start studying and to learn the Talmud. And he said, in the Talmud, it says you can't compare somebody who learned something 100 times to somebody who learned something 101 times. Jacob Riis got it from the Talmud. And Popovich was shocked. He took out a pen and paper and goes, "What's that guy's name?" "Rebbe what?" "It's Rebbe Akiva." Coach then said, "Later when I travel home, I'm going to tell the players about Rebbe Akiva and the lessons that we learned. That's not just from Jacob Riis, but I learned from a Jew in the hotel about the Talmud, and we have to prove in 2,000 years ago. The Jews knew about this, but now we have to work even more hard." And he said, "Coach, do me a favor. Tell them it was somebody in the hotel. You don't have to tell them it was a Jew. We have enough problems of our own. We don't need your team being angry at us." And I share the story not just because it's a great story, because it made me think of a related point. And the context is slightly different and insignificant relative to the insignificance of basketball relevant to Torah. But often in our mind's eye, we plan ahead how we think things are going to play out, how the day is going to look, how the month is going to look, how the week is going to look, how the year. And we get into more and more detail, but then the unexpected happens. Not even in terms of anything extreme. Sometimes it is extreme. We bump into somebody unexpectedly. And from that comes opportunities for chesed to help. And our Parsha, Vayeishev, perhaps more than any other, contains stories of the complete transformation of Bnei Yisrael. From sibling rivalry at home to Yosef narrowly escaping fratricide, ending up in a dungeon in Egypt. And he unknowingly sets the course for his own release. And the Torah says that when Reuven suggests that instead of killing Yosef, he should be thrown into the pit, Rashi points out that he intended to come back. He intended to save him. Vayetzilenu miyadam, to save them from his hands. And the Medrash comments, had Reuven known that in the future would save him, that he saved them, even though all he did was stop him from being killed and he went into the pit, Reuven would have come along and put him on his shoulders and carried him out. What does that mean? Had Reuven known what the Torah would say? He's concerned about his personal kavod. If it's the right thing to do, he should do it because it's the right thing. What's driving Reuven about what the Torah is going to write about him in the future? And I think the Medrash is trying to teach us something else. So much of this story develops unplanned. It's not how Yaakov or the brothers thought their day was going to go. Perhaps the most key moments in the entire story seem to be happenstance. He's unsure where he's going when Yaakov sends him to find his brothers, and he bumps into that Ish that Chazal are sensitive to. Say it had to have been a malach. It just doesn't make any sense. It's just a happenstance meeting. And at the end, he interprets the dreams, and little does he know that when he starts listening to the Sarmashkim, this is going to be his ticket out of there. What's the Torah teaching us? And perhaps what the Torah is trying to highlight for us is the significance of the unplanned opportunities that come our way. The most important moments in our lives are sometimes the ones that we can't map out or plan for. But it's the bumps and the detours that make us into greater people. And the question is, do we ignore them or do we maximize them? And that's what the Medrash is highlighting about Reuven. Had he known that the Torah would say this about him, and that it was such a critical juncture, he would have done even more. Not that it was about Reuven understanding the magnitude of the event. And that's what the Medrash is trying to relate. We never know the magnitude of the events that take place in our life and how we respond to them. I was thinking of this a little bit in terms of the unplanned. As it's coming to the end of the season, we're taking down our tent. We've had people who are moser nefesh to daven outside in the cold for the last 18 months or beyond. That just trying, again, in the light of the craziness of the world, but the fact that people will make sure that day in and day out, there are minyanim, and that they're trying hard, no matter how uncomfortable it is, to make it comfortable, and even if it's not comfortable, to make the most of the opportunity. That's about what this message is about. It's about taking the unexpected and figuring out how to elevate it. And I think it's an inspiration to us. And Mirz Hashem, we should all continue on the path of being able to be safe, being able to be healthy, but also understanding that when the bumps come our way, it's what we do with those opportunities. It's how we maximize them. It's how we don't take it as a setback. But like Reuven, we understand that there was a magnitude to the moment. We don't know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to send us, but we're going to make the most of it. That's what life is about, and that's what's going to help us grow and ultimately become closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu.